So this has been what is it, 2 weeks since we last spoke?
I think it's 2 weeks indeed. It seems an awfully long time.
It's been quite a while. Here's your intro. In the middle of a pandemic that, by the way, is particularly lethal to those with impaired lung function, Trump is rolling back Obama era fuel efficiency standards, which obviously dirty up the air, cause asthma, contribute to compromised lung function. Freelance journalist Sasha Abramsky is here to talk about that policy and others on Trump's agenda as he, continues to move forward with his horrendousness while all our attention is diverted to the COVID-19 crisis. Sasha, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. It's good to be on again.
I think it's so important that we keep our eye on the incoming ball of fascism and horrendousness that Trump is trying to kind of push forward. Can you talk a little bit about the things that the Trump administration is doing while he is parading around pretending to, be dealing with this crisis, which he's not?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've been writing about for the last few weeks is in the middle of a crisis, it's not as if everything else suddenly stops. Everything else keeps going on. We just take our eye off the ball because we're so preoccupied with personal safety, with the well-being of our family, our community, all of which is completely rational. But one of the things that happens is we stop paying attention to all the changes going on, for example, in the regulatory sphere, or power grabs that the administration makes using the excuse of the pandemic to lock down civil liberties and so on. And so I've been doing an awful lot of writing about things going on that should be getting attention and aren't. So what you mentioned in the introduction, this was this extraordinary thing. For the last couple of years, the Trump administration has been looking for ways to destroy an Obama-era agreement that was reached that would dramatically increase fuel efficiency standards across the vehicle fleet. So it would create these average fuel efficiency standards of about 54 miles to the gallon within about 5 years. Technologically, that was totally doable. The auto companies had begun moving in that direction. They were bringing online extremely efficient hybrids and electric vehicles that raised the averages. California and a coalition of states around California was leading the way and pushing for these changes and then negotiating with the Obama administration to create a sort of set of benchmarks to get there. It was all doable. The auto industry was already doing it. They were already modifying their fleets, introducing the technology that was needed. They were well on the way to getting to those fuel efficiency standards. And several car companies had actually sided with California and said, look, we like these higher standards. We want to go with California's even higher standards rather than the federal ones. We can do this. And the Trump administration, basically as a pure sop to the oil industry and nothing else, has been determined for the last 3 years to roll back these standards. And they began doing this by taking away California's Clean Air Act waiver last autumn. And now they're finishing this by actually rolling back the Obama-era standards in a way that's going to result in the burning of 80 billion gallons more gasoline per year in America and putting into the air over 1 billion tons more carbon dioxide. This is insane. There's no technological reason to do this. And it's all being done on the assumption nobody's paying attention because we're all hunkered down trying to avoid getting sick in this pandemic.
Sasha, why is he doing this? Is it just a handout to the oil and gas industry?
No, I've been writing about this for a while. I think some of it is, in a sick, perverse way, a sort of rational extension of his market philosophy, a rational extension of his loyalty to the oil industry and so on. And some of it's irrational in that it's all about rolling back anything and everything the Obama administration put its name to. So it's tried to roll back fuel efficiency standards because Obama put them in place. It's tried to roll back the Affordable Care Act because Obama put it in place. It's rolled back workplace protection laws. It's rolled back laws protecting the right to organize. It's rolled back all kinds of things just because the Obama administration did it. So the Trump administration by default has to be the anti-Obama in everything. And that's psychological. That's Trump's insecurity about who Obama was and is, about the fact that Obama was and remains more popular than Trump is, that he's more educated, that he speaks better, that he's more popular globally. All of these things that infuriate Trump gets boomeranged back onto our polity. And so we end up in this crazy situation where basically the Trump era in large part is going to be defined by the fact that it shredded anything and everything the Obama era did, even in the middle of a public health emergency.
Do you think that race plays a role?
Look, clearly race plays a role. It's animated Trump's policies from the beginning. You see it in the pandemic response, for example. 3,000 doctors 3,000 public health professionals wrote an open letter to the Department of Homeland Security saying, you've got to start releasing inmates from ICE detention because they're overcrowded, they're dangerous. Many of the people in those detention centers are malnourished, they suffer other underlying diseases. They're at particular risk of being just decimated by this pandemic. The Obama administration is releasing no one from the ICE detention facilities. That's all about race.
Yeah. The Trump administration had just, sorry, wanted to.
Sorry,
you said the Obama, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's early morning here. I haven't had my second cup of coffee. I apologize.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure people knew what you meant.
But in all seriousness, I mean, if you look at what Trump's doing, he used the pandemic as an excuse to lock down the southern border for all asylum seekers. He's locked out all refugees during this pandemic. He's now throwing asylum seekers back across the border into Mexico without even a pretense of due process. They're being arrested. They're being thrown back over the border. This breaks all kinds of laws, all kinds of protocols, both national and international. If you look at the global health response in February, not last February, but in February of 2020, when we were already 2 months into the unfolding pandemic, Trump administration cut global funding for global health programs by 35%. This is insane. And this is all about the Trump idea that if America wins, it wins when other countries lose, which is why in the middle of a pandemic, they're cutting global health funding. They're cutting off foreign assistance to Yemen, which is in the middle of a civil war. They're cutting off foreign assistance to Afghanistan. They cut off foreign assistance earlier in the cycle to Central American countries. We're seeing time after time this rollback and this nativism in American policy. And it is racial. And it is based on this idea that for us to win, other countries must lose. It's also absolutely counterproductive. It's not how you should perform, or it's not how you can win a war, if you want to call it that, against the virus, because viruses don't respect borders. We beat the virus if everybody is healthy, not if only America is healthy.
I think we should stop giving Trump credit about, or even the credit that he wants to win the war against the virus. I mean, disaster capitalism, a disaster is happening, so you can kind of do whatever you want over here. The idea that he actually wants to fix it is not necessarily valid.
I mean, look, Trump has shown at the beginning of this crisis an absolute indifference as it unfolded. Then once the crisis did escalate and it became impossible to ignore, he used it as an excuse to sort of impose these very draconian restrictions that we've been talking about. And now he's appointed Jared Kushner to coordinate the COVID response. You couldn't make a worse appointment. This is a man with no empathy. He's a man with no scientific background. He's exactly the worst kind of individual that you want coordinating a pandemic response. Everything about the way the Trump administration has responded has been about image rather than substance. You see it in Trump's press conferences, where he gloats about the ratings that his coronavirus press conferences are getting. You see it in the fact that in the middle of a pandemic, he's picking personal fights and name calling against governors like Jay Inslee in Washington, or Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, or Andrew Cuomo in New York. Again, this isn't the stuff of inspired leadership. This is petty, it's stupid, it shows a complete lack of understanding of the gravity of the moment. And it shows that Trump is deeply, deeply out of his depth when he's dealing with the worst public health crisis the world's faced since the Spanish flu pandemic 102 years ago. And I think that, in the long run, I don't know how this plays out in the short term, but when the history books are written about this era, people are going to be absolutely staggered that the most powerful human being on earth was a snake oil salesman who peddled potential cures that had no medical basis, who mocked his own scientists and his own advisors in public, and who clearly didn't care about the human cost that this toll was enacting across the country.
You say that the Trump administration's rollback of environmental standards may actually backfire. Talk about what you mean by that.
Well, it was so extreme that even a lot of the car companies sort of raised their eyebrows at it. So I mentioned earlier that a number of car companies, it was 4 major car companies, had sided with California and had already said, look, we're going to decrease our fuel tailpipe emissions. We're going to work towards more efficient cars because we think it's the right thing to do. Now, after the Trump administration did this just spectacularly large and ill-informed rollback of the Obama era regulations, it looks like a number of additional car companies are now so annoyed at this because they've invested so much money in becoming more fuel efficient that they're about to side with California in the lawsuits that California and a couple dozen other states are now pushing against the federal government. So Volvo looks likely to join. My sources tell me there are other companies that are also likely to join. So it's entirely possible that Trump has now sort of created a de facto alliance of convenience between environmentalists and car companies and progressive state leadership. And, you know, in a weird way, this could be the sort of last hurrah of a dying ideology, this ideology that you have to pollute, you have to do dirty growth. All of this in the middle of a pandemic looks and sounds so tone deaf that it's entirely possible that people are going to just turn away from it in revulsion in the end.
Sasha, do you have any evidence from where you sit and what you see that the people that we would want to turn against him are turning against him? I mean, I
Well,
think the people who are already against him are just now fully sickened by him, but I'm not sure.
Unfortunately, where I sit and what I see is limited at the moment. I'm sitting in an attic in Sacramento, and I go outside on walks early morning and occasionally to the stores.
I'm the
not
same.
Going out and doing,
we're in the basement. Yeah.
We're all
Yes.
hunkered down. But in all seriousness, what it means is I'm not doing what I normally do, which is traveling around the country and talking to people. And, you know, I'm doing phone interviews and everything else, but it's really hard to take the pulse of the moment when you're hunkered down in one place. I don't know. I mean, I'm reading the same polls everyone else is reading, which is that in the last couple of weeks, Trump got a very small approval bump. Now, you know, whenever there's a national emergency, a president always gets an approval bump, but usually it goes up by 30 or 40%.
Yeah, but a president is usually doing something at that point.
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, after 9/11, I mean, whatever one thought of George W. Bush, and I was no fan of the man, but after 9/11, he did see a huge approval bump, and it lasted the better part of a year. His approval went up into the 80% range, I believe. And most presidents at a time of national emergency temporarily see a vast approval bump because there's this sort of rallying around effect. Trump has seen an approval bump. It's been minuscule in comparison. It was about a 4 or 5% approval bump. It took him up to maybe the high 40s in his approval rating, and it seems to already be coming down. And the more the economy, especially
Cuomo has his bump. Everyone loves Governor Cuomo now. Governor Cuomo is getting the bump.
Well, this is it. You know, when you actually look at who's responding effectively, it's not the Democratic national leadership and it's not the Republican national leadership. Joe Biden is sitting in his kitchen somewhere looking irrelevant. Trump, I wish he was sitting in his kitchen looking irrelevant. Trump instead is giving these crazy press conferences where he's basically spouting one untruth after another. But the people
I think that's good, personally. I think he, you know, the more you show him, the more he'll hang himself.
Well, maybe. I mean, he seems absolutely incapable of focusing on what needs to be focused on. But really, the most important people as this crisis are playing out are governors around this country, both Democrat and Republican, who are actually doing the hard work. And precisely because the federal government's basically AWOL at this point, it's not coordinating medical supplies. It's being very sparse in its distribution of ventilators and all these other things. It's up to the states to step in. And you saw a couple of days ago, California actually began coordinating a national effort to rationally distribute ventilators to where they're needed. California's flattened its curve. It doesn't need as many ventilators right now as it will later on in the crisis. It sent 500 ventilators into a national stockpile that it is coordinating rather than the Trump administration. And that national stockpile is then going to be able to distribute resources to places like New Orleans, New York, and Detroit, which need them now. So I think what you're seeing is this extraordinary resurrection of the reputation of governors. Now, you know, the sad thing about that is if this had come 2 or 3 months ago, we would have had a totally different presidential race. In the Democratic primaries in particular, we would have had far more choice because it would have been the governors of the big states who would have been the hands-on people that voters were turning to. And I suspect what we're going to see now is that over the next few months, those governors, one by one by one, are going to be tapped by Biden in particular as potential cabinet members if he becomes the president, because these are the high visibility people at the moment who are showing that politics can work.
What are your thoughts about the potential that an Inslee or a Newsom or Cuomo could actually be the person that the Democrats run for office? I mean, the fact that Joe Biden is nowhere to be found, and when he is seen, I mean, we just played a video on our show right before this about he's kind of not making a lot of sense. At least Bernie Sanders, who is still in the running, he put out, a plan of what he should do. He's criticizing Trump. Joe Biden's he's the front runner, but he's not anywhere.
It's an interesting question. I don't know how this plays out. I mean, if you look at it, you have to assume that the Democrats are going to respect the delegate process, and the delegate process, by the time we get to, I think the conventions have been pushed back till August. But by the time we get to August, all of those delayed primaries will have taken place, and it's almost certain that Joe Biden will have a numeric majority because it's a two-person race now, and he's beating Sanders. So in a two-person race, the person who wins gets the number of delegates. So Biden is going to go in with a critical mass that gives him the candidacy. On the other hand, you're absolutely right that he's been largely invisible. He hasn't worked out a strategy that pushes him into the national conversation. He's trying to do these sort of bare bones online YouTube productions and everything else, and he doesn't know how to do it. It's not who he is. On the other hand, you have all these governors who know exactly how to do it. They're holding these press conferences every day, these webinars. They're showing they're hands-on. They're showing they're in control of the situation. They're showing they can act under pressure. So you're going to have a whole bunch of very, very plausible, top-notch politicians who could step in if Biden would step aside. Now, that said, as I said, I don't think that's going to happen. I suspect we're going to have Biden as the nominee, but if he's smart and if his advisors are smart, they're going to buttress him with a whole bunch of really, really skilled politicians, especially governors and some of the senators who have really excelled as well, who he can say, all right, this is a package deal. You elect me, you don't just get me, but you get so-and-so as health secretary, you get so-and-so as attorney general. He's got to present a sort of complete package in order to restore relevancy to his candidacy. I suspect he will. I mean, Biden's not a stupid human being. He's a very savvy politician. He's surrounded by very savvy advisors. He knows that at the moment, anything he says is going to get lost in the noise, precisely because he isn't making decisions. He doesn't have that capacity because he's not a governor. When things calm down a bit over the summer, and I assume they will, they may not return to normal, but things are going to be less abnormal 4 months from now than they are today. When there is more room in the conversation for things outside of the coronavirus and the immediate response, Biden will step back into the conversation. We're still 7 months out from the election. 2 weeks since I was last on this show seems an eternity at the moment. 7 months seems an eternity to the nth degree. So I think we should just calm down a little bit about Biden's invisibility and wait for things to calm down and wait for, something approximating a normal political debate to be restored.
I know this is a little bit off topic, but yesterday on the Thom Hartmann program, he discussed how it might be a good idea for the blue states to just kind of get together now. The fact that they are getting together to distribute ventilators outside of the federal government. Do you see this? I mean, as Tom was talking about, some people are saying that this is the beginning of, a red states versus blue state, or a blue state versus red states, where the blue states who, sort of take back their power and drop the dead weight of the red states.
I think that's exactly what's going to happen. And if you look at the difference in caliber in response to the crisis, there have been some very good Republican governors. Mike DeWine in Ohio, right from the get-go, was ahead of the curve on this. He understood the enormity of it. He was very quick to close down schools and so on. So there have been some good Republican governors. But by and large, it's been the Democratic governors who took the initiative in stay-at-home orders. It was the Democratic governors who started ramping up their own production facilities when they realized the feds not just were dropping the ball, but were standing in the way of the distribution of medical supplies. And it's been Democratic governors who have been most creative, both in trying to sort of stop the economic hemorrhaging by putting in place moratoriums on evictions, putting in place protections for consumers who couldn't pay utility bills and so on, and also getting out unemployment faster. And it has been, by and large, Republican states who have stood back and done either nothing or not very much. So Republican states delayed stay-at-home orders. 8 states, again, all Republican-led, still don't have stay-at-home orders, despite the fact that everybody, including Dr. Fauci at the federal level, has been saying, what are you doing? You need to start bringing people apart. You need to start making social distancing a priority. But 8 Republican governors just won't do that. The Republican governor in Georgia, in the middle of all of his cities and everyone else putting in place stay-at-home orders, the Republican governor reopened his beaches last week. the Florida governor refused to do a statewide stay-at-home order, and then watched as spring breakers came to the state and congregated in just absurd numbers. And in Florida, you're seeing when the economy has begun crashing, as it is all over the country because of the stay-at-home orders, in Florida, their unemployment system has been designed to be so unusable, and this was a deliberate strategy to try and limit the numbers who could claim unemployment in Florida, that the system repeatedly is crashing. So hundreds of thousands of unemployed Floridians just can't access unemployment benefits because they can't navigate a system that was intentionally designed to not be navigatable. So I think you're absolutely right. The longer this plays out, the more you see that Democratic governors are functioning well, are using their powers and their resources effectively. In New York, you've seen essentially a sort of de facto, I guess the word would be a nationalization of hospitals, where they're basically saying all hospitals, public and private, are going to work together. They're not going to compete for resources. They're not going to compete as to who gets which patients and who doesn't get which patients. There's going to be a rational distribution of patients and a rational distribution of resources throughout the New York State hospital system. Something like the national systems in place in Europe or in Canada. And I think that that's going to look increasingly appealing. And the states that are going to be really, really, really badly hit are states that aren't doing that, that are underinvesting in their health resources, underinvesting in their public sectors, that are riddled with this ideology that says all things government is bad. Exactly. And have sort of turned the dysfunction of government into a state art form. And they're the states that are going to be really, really hammered, both economically and also in terms of what happens to their health systems over the next year.
We're speaking with Sasha Abramsky, a journalist, author, and creator of the Abramsky Report. Sasha, anything else you'd like to point out that Trump is doing behind our backs? I know there's so much. Yeah.
You know, the obvious one is what he did with the Inspector General on Friday evening. The Inspector General who referred the whistleblower's report to Congress, which was his job. If you get a whistleblower's report that's credible, you have to refer it to Congress. And Trump fired him. And he made no pretense about why. He said, I don't have any confidence in the guy. And then at the press conference on Saturday, he said, I didn't like the way he handled the whistleblower complaint. It was fake news, et cetera, et cetera. That's a direct attack on democracy. There's an op-ed by Noah Bookbinder in the New York Times today explaining just how autocratic that move is and how dangerous it is to the institutions of government. And this stuff is happening on a regular basis. Trump and Mike Pompeo are pulling out of the Open Skies Agreement, which is one of the last remaining deterrent treaties in place between the US and Russia, and the US and its allies and Russia, that allows mutual overflies so that Russians can fly over American space, Americans can fly over Russian space, and they can monitor each other's military activities to make sure there are no surprises brewing. It's been a peacekeeper for 3 decades, and the Trump administration announced, I think it was this weekend, that they're going to pull out. And they did it despite the fact all of their allies said to them, please don't do this, it's a really bad idea. So all kinds of things are happening while we're distracted by the pandemic. And, you know, our challenge, and I said this at the beginning, it's probably as good a place as any to wrap up. Our challenge as members of the community, as concerned citizens and so on, is to stay attuned. It's really easy to get so overwhelmed by the sort of immediacy of the coronavirus news that we shun, you know, we put to the side everything else. And the danger of that is if we put everything else to the side, this country is going to become even more autocratic and its government even more dictatorial in its tendencies than Trump has already sort of managed to make it. And that's the danger.
Sasha, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I guess I will be talking to you in 2 weeks. I hope it doesn't seem quite as long as the last 2 weeks.
You know what? I've got something to look forward to now. It's a joy. Thanks again.
All right. Take care of yourself. And thank you so much again for being on with us.
All right. See you in a couple of weeks.
You're watching act.tv. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have interviews coming out every single day. And if you want to see more coverage and just kind of hang out with us, come to our Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/act.tv. And we're pretty much live on the air there all day long. Thank you for watching us on Facebook. Our Facebook stream is coming to a close today. Our Facebook stream will be live from 10 a.m. to about 11:15 every day, Monday through Friday. So stay tuned, and also keep your watch on our Facebook page, ActTV's Facebook page, because we have tons of great progressive content. Thank you so much for being with us today. And thanks to Phil for producing on Facebook. We'll see you later. Come and join us over on Twitch if you want. We're there.